What if the only food a Lagos billionaire could keep down came from a rusted coal pot on a dusty street corner? When a scarred tech magnate haunted by losses he never speaks of meets a barefoot girl who sells steaming noodles beside a gutter, it's more than hunger that wakes in him. In the smoke of her pan is something he thought he'd buried forever. The taste of home, the memory of belonging. He believed it was just lunch. He didn't know it was the first thread in a story that would unravel his solitude, rewrite his past, and feed him in ways no fortune ever could. Sit back, relax, and let the coal smoke curl around your imagination as we dive into a story where the hum of Lagos streets meets the quiet magic of a roadside stall where one plate of noodles can change everything. By the time the sun stretched its pale arms over the sprawling streets of Ajegunle, Lagos was already rumbling. Danfos coughed fumes, traders argued over prices, and hawkers weaved between traffic with trays balanced like crowns. But on a crooked street called Ijaye Crescent, the longest queue wasn't at a bank or a bus stop. It was at a weather-beaten stall made of uneven planks, standing beside a drainage gutter where rainwater often whispered its secrets. There was no signboard, no glass counter, not even a generator. But it had something Lagos had never tasted anywhere else: Mara's noodles. Mara Anadubi was only 9, but when she stood on her faded yellow stool, turning noodles in her soot-blackened pan over a coal stove, she cooked with the patience of old women and the daring of youth. Her mother, Irioma, peeled boiled eggs on a plastic chair beside her, handing plates to customers with a soft smile. Men in agbadas stood shoulder to shoulder with motorcyclists. Market women shared shade with bankers in suits, and still, everyone waited. Mara had a rule stricter than any government order: only 20 plates a day. No more, no less. Not even if you offered the moon. Small Madam A begged, "Just one extra," a sweating man begged. "I go pay 20,000. Mara didn't even look up. "Uncle, you came late. The pot is almost closed." Someone at the back laughed. "The small girl's Sabi-run business past Dangote." That morning, Mara had no idea her life was about to twist like the steam above her pot. Across the road, a black Range Rover idled quietly. Inside sat a man whose name still caused whispers in Lagos boardrooms: Osei's Branthwaite. His suit cost more than most people's rent, but in 3 years he hadn't eaten a full meal. Not until the smell from this little stall reached him like a hand from the past. He opened his door and stepped into her world. Osei Branthwaite didn't announce himself. Lagos already did that for him. Heads turned as he joined the tail of the queue, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. Jaw tight like a man in a permanent negotiation with pain. When he finally reached the front, the coal smoke curled around him, and Mara looked up, face shining with the sheen of heat and work. "Oga, noodles don't finish," she said, voice small but sure. He felt the disappointment like a physical thing. For 3 years, food had been a blank page. Now the air itself tasted like memory. "Not even a spoon?" he asked, the question sounding foolish to his own ears. Mara studied him, then smiled as if she'd just recognized a face from a dream. "I kept one plate for someone special," she said. "I think it's you." She slid the enamel plate toward him. No garnish tricks, no chef swagger. Just noodles glossed with peppered oil, spring onions, a whisper of crayfish, and steam that smelled like mornings before life complicated itself. He sat on the rough bench. First bite, his shoulder loosened. Second bite, his jaw unclenched. By the fourth, the noise of Ajegunle thinned to a hush only coal fires know. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. He simply ate as though time had folded and returned something he'd lost without noticing. From the doorway of a one-room behind the stall, a woman's shadow moved, then stilled. Irioma. Watching. Listening. Hiding. When the plate was empty, Mara wiped her hands on a blue towel and beamed. "Thank you, Baba." The words slipped from her like a fact of nature. Osei blinked. "What did you call me?" "Baba," she repeated, unbothered, as if renaming a stranger were an everyday chore between boiling and plating. Something old shifted in his chest, grief or grace, he couldn't tell. He handed the plate back with both hands, a quiet reverence. "Thank you, Mara." He didn't ask how she knew his name. Lagos always knows. He rose, returned to the black Range Rover, and carried a taste with him that refused to fade. He came back the next morning, and the next, and the next, as if the street itself had issued a standing order with his name on it. Sometimes he arrived early and stood in the sun like any other Lagosian rehearsing patience. Sometimes he slipped in late, and Mara would lift a covered plate like a secret she'd kept warm just for him. They talked between servings about traffic on Third Mainland Bridge, about the boy who sold plantain chips with a poet's confidence, about why water tastes different from a clay pot. He kept his questions light, but his eyes always drifted toward the doorway curtain. "Your mama," he'd ask. "Inside," Mara would say, the word landing like a padlock. The curtain never moved. On the fifth day, he noticed the bangle. Not expensive faded brass with a tiny Benin-styled fish etched into it, hairline crack running through the tail. It should have been ordinary. It wasn't. He knew it because he kept its twin in a box at home, a relic his grandmother pressed into his palm the year the world changed. "It comes in twos," she'd said. "Some things only make sense when the other half arrives." He crouched so his voice matched her height. "Where you get this?" Mara lifted her wrist and shrugged. "It has always been mine. Mama says it's lucky." Something in him stood up and ran even while his body stayed kneeling. That night in Victoria Island, the city's lights glittered like 1,000 unresolved questions. Osaze opened his drawer and held the matching bangle, tracing the same fish, the same crack unfinished lines waiting to meet. Memories pounded the glass of his mind. A younger Irioma laughing at Elagushi Beach, a radio spitting high life from a cracked speaker, sand hot underfoot, a kiss that tasted like mangoes and rain. Then the silence that followed, no calls, no explanations, only distance and pride with long claws. He'd convinced himself she hadn't loved him enough to stay. Staring at the bangle, he realized love had stayed anyway. It just hid in a child's kitchen smoke. And sleep was a thin sheet that night. He sat with his therapist's old questions in his head and answers that now felt embarrassingly simple. 3 years of trauma-induced anorexia had turned him into a man who negotiated with bites like clauses in a hostile contract. It had started after the accident, his parents' driver blinking at the wrong second on Echo Bridge, metal folding like paper, the city's noise drowned by the single, unforgivable quiet that followed. Food turned into rubble. Every plate mocked him for surviving. He became the billionaire who couldn't finish a meal. Then a roadside girl stirred onions in red oil, and the body that had refused everything said yes without discussion. He returned to Ajagunle at the hour the city yawns before the hustle hits full stride. The line had formed. The gossip had too. People whispered his name like it might grant them free data. When he reached the front, Mara grinned and tapped the covered pot. "I told the fire your name," she said solemnly. "It listened." He chuckled despite himself. "And your mama?" The curtain lifted an inch, then dropped. "She stepped out," Mara lied with a bravery that looked a lot like love. He let it be for now. But Lagos secrets always volunteer eventually. The city hates unfinished stories. That afternoon, he drove to Elagushi and stood where sea fingers licked the edge of memory. He remembered giving Irioma the bangle half, promising the second when they built a life big enough for both. He remembered the way calls stopped, how his mother's disapproval had been a wind that pushed at small boats. He remembered a tabloid photo him at a party, another woman planting a kiss he didn't return, and the wildfire that followed. Somewhere between pride and pain, two people built distance like a house and moved in. He closed his eyes against the noise of waves, opened them to the sound of his driver's cough. "Oga," the man said gently, "if a story won't leave you, it means it hasn't finished with you." On a Monday heavy with humidity, a pearl-white SUV glided to a stop at the corner. The man who stepped out wore a starched jacket and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Chef Baraka Okonkwo, owner of a Lekki bistro that served plates like art and prices like threats. He inspected the stall as if it were a rash on his city. "So this is the miracle pot," he announced, voice tuned for an audience. "A child tossing noodles by a gutter is now the city's palate priest." Customers shifted, sensing trouble the way goats sense rain. We do 20 plates, Irioma said evenly, standing at last, apron tied like armor. No miracles, just clean hands and heart. Baraka flicked a folder open: permits, regulations, a list of sins written in bureaucrat. No license, no NAFDAC clearance, no hygiene certificate. Honestly, madam, if the city won't tidy its corners, professionals like us must insist. Mara froze with her ladle midair, gaze veering to her mother's face. Someone at the back hissed. Another took a step away. The air went tight. Professionals like you should cook, not bully, a voice said, calm, knife sharp. Osaz stepped forward, casual in a polo, yet the street straightened anyway. If you care about standards, fix your own kitchen. If you care about people, sit down and taste. Baraka's mouth twitched. He wasn't used to being told no, and certainly not here. And you are? A regular, Osaz said, and a witness. They're cleaner than most restaurants with chandeliers. The crowd murmured. Baraka lifted his chin. Fine, prove it where it matters. Niger Tastemasters is auditioning. Kitchen lights don't lie. Enter if this is more than street theatrics. He slid a glossy flyer onto the plank counter and left a perfume of irritation behind. Mara picked up the flyer, eyes like full moons. A stage, cameras, judges. Fear jumped. So did something else, joy with football boots. Training began the way Harmattan creeps in quiet, then everywhere. Dawn found Mara tying her apron with solemn ceremony while Ajagunli warmed its bones. There were no chrome counters, just a coal pot, a bent spoon, and a mother who had learned to convert scarcity into flavor. Irioma unboxed a battered notebook, pages soft from use. Your grandfather Arins wrote with smoke, she said, tapping a page stained with oil. He cooked for a military governor in the old days. He believed hunger is a language, and food is how we answer. Mara leaned in like a disciple. They cooked jollof until the rice grains whispered agreement. They peeled plantains so thin it fried like sunshine. They built broths that tasted like forgiveness. Osaz brought what he could without bruising their pride. New aprons, a tabletop burner, measuring spoons, a small blender that purred like a cat. He stayed at the edge of the room, making calls to bribe time itself, registration fees covered, transport arranged. A quiet word placed where Lagos gatekeepers sit. Don't push, he told himself. Just open doors and let her walk. At night, Victoria Island shimmered outside his window while he turned the brass bangle over and over, wondering which apology belonged first and which truth could carry the rest. Mara learned the architecture of taste, how pepper doesn't shout when you teach it to sing, how crayfish can be a memory and a map, how salt is not a flavor, but a spotlight. When she failed, Irioma added more wood, not more words. Again. When she succeeded, they didn't celebrate long. Again. Between batches, Mara scribbled ideas with pencil stubs. Gary-crusted akara sliders, smoky okra over cassava gnocchi, roadside suya reimagined as a waltz. She wanted to cook her street without apology. She wanted the city to recognize itself on a plate and feel finally full. The Niger Tastemasters Arena at Landmark Center glittered with possibility and neon. Stainless counters winked under bright lights. Cameras blinked like patient owls. Contestants adjusted knives in confidence. In the stands, Lagos arrived dressed as itself, chants, laughter, side bets. The host boomed. Cook from your roots. 1 hour. No second chances. Mara opened her kit, reached for tomatoes and stopped. Rot. Seasoning cubes, missing. Protein, sour. Her throat tightened. On the other side, Chef Baraka examined his herbs with an innocence that felt like theater. For 3 seconds, Mara did nothing. Then she did everything. She turned to the communal shelf at the back, leftovers. No chef wanted that aisle. She took yesterday's boiled rice, an onion, a handful of groundnut, half a cup of gari. She toasted the gari till it smelled like dry season and grit. She folded groundnut into a pepper onion butter that glowed. She shaped rice into tiny cakes, seared them crispy, slid them under a clothed dome of spicy peanut sauce, and set beside them a small bowl of oji sweetened with date syrup and lime zest. No meat, no magic, just memory plated with a steady hand. When the judges asked what she'd made, Mara stood on her stool and answered like a Lagos child who has outlived condescension. It's what we ate when rent was a story and not a receipt. It's called whole body, because sometimes survival is the seasoning. The first judge tasted, frowned, tasted again. The second set down her spoon and pressed her palm to her chest. The third wrote nothing, only swallowed like a man at church. The audience quieted as if a baby had just fallen asleep. Scores lit the screen. Highest of the day. In seats, Irioma cried into her towel. In the aisle, Osaz smiled at the floor because looking up would give too much away. Someone had tried to starve the story. The story learned a new language and spoke back. With success came the noise hashtags, think pieces, jealous whispers that sound like advice. A rumor blistered through blogs. Street girl made judges sick. Another? Child labor disguised as talent. It escalated so quickly you'd think malice was running on generator. That evening, the organizers called a press briefing to swat the flies. Cameras rolled. Sponsors breathed into water bottles. Chef Baraka arrived early and smiled for angles that forgave nothing. Before the host could open his mouth, Osaz walked to the mic like a man who'd already paid for the stage. I have something to show. The lights dimmed. Footage flickered. A figure in a hoodie gliding through the contestant pantry the night before auditions, swapping fresh ingredients for rot, sliding bad protein into Mara's kit. The timestamp was merciless. Gasps clapped around the room. Recovered with permission from facility CCTV, Osage said, I forwarded a copy to the police. Every camera in the city pivoted to Baraka. He adjusted his cuff as if it were suddenly strangling him. Afterward, in a quieter corridor that smelled of dust and triumph, Osaze pressed an envelope into Irioma's hands. I needed to know, he said, voice rough. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. Inside, test results, a percentage that might as well have been a sunrise 99.98% probability. Mara, his. Irioma's breath broke. She had practiced 100 speeches for 100 futures. None fit this moment. Why didn't you fight for me? She whispered, years collapsing. I thought you left, he said. Tabloid pictures. My mother's disapproval. Then the accident. I folded into the dark. I stopped eating. She looked at him, then really looked at the fine cracks pride hides. I cooked so our child would forget hunger, she said. I hid so we could breathe. They weren't reconciled by a document, but the paper held the door while the truth walked in. Final night. Lagos wore sequins. The brief was ceremonial. Cook a dish that carries your lineage. Baraka raised his chin and plated perfection precision slices, imported smugness. When Mara stepped up, some in the crowd sucked teeth. She'll copy, they muttered, faithless to the end. She set her station with the calm of someone who's cooked love into scraps. The clock began. She didn't look at Baraka. She looked at the coal in her memory and blew gently. Her dish took its name from the white-cowled processions that danced through Lagos Island. Ayo on a plate. She poached guinea fowl till tender as apology, lacquered quail in palm wine, and alligator pepper, grilled pigeon till the skin blistered like festival drums, and carved each into feather-light slices. On a base of smoky millet tuo, she arranged the meats into a flowing cascade, white yam puree tracing the sweeping agbada of an Ayo masquerade, pickled atarodo standing in for tassels, a drizzle of ube oil for shine. It was theater, yes, but the kind that remembers why the mask exists. To bless, to warn, to heal. When the judges ate, the hall changed temperature. One closed his eyes like he'd just seen someone he missed in a crowd and rested his spoon as if it might break the spell. Baraka stood abruptly. Plagiarism, he barked. Royal heritage recipes are not for street theatrics. The audience hissed. Before the accusations could root, the showrunner cut in with a challenge. Sudden death cook-off. No assistance, no pantry foreknowledge, just a basket of basics and an hour to prove what your hands know. Baraka cooked like a surgeon. Mara listened to the sizzle and built a story. Caramelized onions folded into groundnut and crayfish gravy, soft dumplings filled with shredded chicken and garden herbs, a charred pepper relish that tasted like hard-won joy. Tasting time. Judges leaned back from Baraka's dish, respectful nods. They leaned into Mara's eyes, watered. Etiquette bent. Then security ushered in a young man in a black hoodie. Confession spilled. Baraka paid for the sabotage. The room stood. Posters came down in silence. Winner of Niger Taste Masters, the mic declared, voice shaking. Mara Anidubi. Lagos roared like the sea. The cameras cooled, but life warmed. Within a week, the stall on Ijai Crescent closed without sadness. The coal pot retired like an elder who'd raised a nation. Irioma and Mara moved to Ikoyi, where the house had more rooms than their old street had speed bumps. But it wasn't marble that mattered. It was the first morning they cooked together in a bright kitchen with windows that remembered Harmattan light, Mara teaching uniformed chefs how to flirt with pepper without shouting, Irioma sitting for once while someone else washed the bowls. Osaz ate full plates, second helpings, and nothing in him argued. At the gala, Lagos arrived in the only way it knows how. Extra, politicians, Nollywood faces, a high-life band coaxing old hips into new sins. Osazi stood on the stage with two women flanking him, one small and incandescent, the other steady as a lighthouse. Tonight is not about money, he said. It's about a child who taught me to live again. From today, she bears my name, Mara Branthwaite, my daughter, my pride, my heir. Applause thundered, then softened as he turned to Irioma and reached for a velvet box. I lost you once to noise I didn't fight. I won't make that mistake again. Will you marry me? The room held its breath. Mara, sensible as always, nudged their hands together. Let's finish the story, she said. Irioma laughed through tears. Yes. Later, under fairy lights in a garden that hummed like a happy hive, the three of them sat with plates of what else noodles. The taste hadn't changed. Everything else had. Will we still cook at the corner sometimes? Mara asked, twirling her fork. We'll cook everywhere, Irioma said, for people who need remembering. Osaze looked at the two halves of the brass bangles, now whole on their wrists, and smiled like a man who had finally learned hunger's true opposite. Not fullness, belonging. Lagos exhaled around them loud, restless, forgiving. And in a city that rarely stops, a family did, for the length of one perfect meal, until the end. What do you think about smoke from the coal pot? Did Mara's journey from a gutter-side coal pot to the national stage move you? Did the family's reunion and Osaze's transformation hit you in the heart, or did another moment stand out more? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you love this story, pass it on to someone who believes the smallest acts, like a plate of noodles, can change everything.